First, Knightly Tale, Vorta, the Dragon. Chapter 1. The land of Norval is near the midway point of the other hemisphere of our world, and much farther east, where the sun is born every morn. Norval is located between four grand mountain ranges that form a huge rocky ring, with Norval being all the lands in the center. That realm is a mixture of fertile green pastures, deep wooded forests, and great misty swamps. To the north of Norval lay the dark gray rocks of the spine of Korath. That length of jutting rock is said to be the remains of the ancient god Korath, who was cut down at the beginning of time when the gods did war among each other. Those that traveled among the rocks confirmed that the mountain range appeared to be the broken spine of some giant. Others could well account for the mysteries surrounding the area, including the strange creatures and sounds that came from within the fissures and caves between the boulders. Although there were some places in Norval that could be said to give off the air of evil, the spine of Korath had an air of danger and death, natural and not. Toward the resting place of the sun in the west lay the Grand Crystal Mountains, a natural wonder without equal in the world I have traveled. The entire mountain range is made of rock permeated by crystals, from single gems the size of a large man to those as small as grains of sand. Mines dotted that mountain range, worked mostly by dwarves, but also on occasion by other creatures and beings. As beautiful as those crystal formations were, the great splendor of the mountains did not show itself until the sun was born or went to his rest. When the first light of the newborn sun struck the crystal mountains, the entire sky of Norval momentarily shone with all the colors of the rainbow. When the sun went to rest, the heavens would glow once again, but in a fiery red that set the sky ablaze with ruby light, before turning into deep purple and eventually fading into the blackness of night. The wonderful Blue Mountains, for which they were aptly named, lay to the south. It was once thought that those mountains were blue because they reached high enough to touch the sky and steal its color. Such was untrue, of course. It is now known that the rocks and soil were blue because of the enrichment of a mineral abundant in copper and sulfur. Still, the idea that the bright blue color came from the sky was a popular, if inaccurate, romantic notion. Where the sun was born in the east was the darkest of the mountain ranges, the Red Mountains. The mounts are rust red from many iron deposits, and it is from that area that the fine metalsmiths of Norval gathered ore to make their creations. Many said that the finest sword steel came from the rich iron veins in the deeper recesses of those mountains, though gathering such ore was not the safest task one could do in Norval. The mountains are not the darker of the rock chains due to their color, but rather due to the mystery of evil that clung to the area. The most notable of those areas was the Peak of Toran, the highest point in the mountain chain, and possibly in all Norval. That rocky crag was constantly surrounded by a halo of clouds, so the top was never visible. The peak gained its name from the great cavalier Toran, one of but 3 people who ever reached the cloud-encrusted summit and survived. The brave, daring Toran once tried to seek the mystery at the top of the peak, because the tales and stories of what lay behind the shrouding clouds were many and varied. He went forward with a calm face, confident in his abilities and magical armor and blade. Those who lived there said that on the day after he scaled the mountain, there echoed for many moments the loud rumble of falling rock and the sound of some frightful beast. Then came the silence of death. None dared climb the rock to see what happened. Toran was not seen for nearly 2 weeks. A surprised lumberman came upon Toran as he stumbled through the dark ironwood forest, a shadow of his former self. His grand armor was but a few battered pieces. Almost all of it was gone, ripped from his ragged body. His strong fingers that once held a mighty sword in their grasp were of gnarled flesh, worn to the bone. His once raven black hair was a tangled mass of singed white. Scorch marks covered his badly bruised, torn body from head to foot, as if he had fallen down a ragged mountain of fire. Toran died 3 days later, while under the care of the priests of the Brotherhood of Sharta. Despite their ministrations, healing herbs, and constant prayers, Toran seemed to have only one lone spark of life left, with no desire to kindle it. Only one word did he speak before his death. None knew what it meant for almost another generation, but as the fates would have it, the people of Norval would come to understand full well the terror that caused a man like Toran to die, broken in body, mind, and spirit. The word he gave with his last dying breath was Vorta. 3 of the mountains spawned a river each. From the spine of Karath came a slow-flowing, dark river. The stream twisted through shadowy forest and forbidding marsh, both well known for being dangerous to travelers who failed to keep an open ear or keen watch. That river eventually drained into the great swamp of Norval, another place known for being dangerous for the unwary. The dark river justly earned its name as a place of menace and also for its color. Although deep brown and somewhat acidic to the taste, akin to that of rotting vegetation, the river water was safe enough to drink, just not very palatable. As one might expect, the Crystal Mountains gave birth to an equally impressive river, the Crystal River. It was as clear as the sky and as pure as one could imagine water being. It was known that even during the hottest season, the water was as cold as ice in deep winter. Swimming across the river and surviving the freezing water was oft a rite of passage for certain clans and sects in that area. It was said that at the Crystal River's headwaters, hidden somewhere in the mountains, were creatures frozen solid by the cold of the water's source as they attempted to drink from it. The mighty Crystal River drained into the great swamp, as did the third river, the aptly named Blood River, which came from the Red Mountains and gained its reddish color from the iron deposits over which it flowed. Strangely, the water was foul-smelling and poisonous in many areas, yet it was clean and drinkable only a march distance away. Only by the presence of a water plant called Red Rush could one determine if the water was safe. Why the water cycled from poisonous to clean, and what that plant had to do with it, was another of the mysteries surrounding that foreboding mountainous area. Not having a true river, the Blue Mountains had a water source. From high up in the cliff, Agatra poured the palest of blue spring water, falling hundreds of feet to the ground where it disappeared. 1 hour's march to the east, the water returned to greet the sun and formed Blue Lake. Despite the beauty of those pale blue waters, it had a strong smell of brimstone. Though it was safe enough to drink, few did, because the rotten egg taste matched the vile stench. Its healing properties, however, were well known and frequently used. It was not unheard of for the infirm or injured to travel for days to bathe in the warm springs surrounding that lake. Blue water was oft sold in apothecary shops throughout Norval. As Darmir continued his lengthy description, I could tell that this was not to be another simple tale of myth. He was spending far too much time and attention to detail. It seemed as if he was describing places that he knew well. This is the story, Darmir continued, of 2 heroes of Norval. They arose from the common people and became famous throughout Norval for their courage, bravery, and love. They came from vastly different backgrounds, yet it was the threat of a common foe that brought them together. He looked into my eyes. A very common way to bring about peace in troubled times, young sire. He nodded slightly. I felt taken aback by that look. It was as if he knew something about my future that I did not. It was true that, with my father's position in Raylan, I might well become one of the future lords who ruled. Nonetheless, such a thing would not, or could not, occur for many years. Shaking his head slightly, the old man said, "To understand the true nature of this tale, and of those who participated in it, one must know the history of each. The 2 heroes are, I shall say, well known to me. For the dragon, I know the following from a source I cannot yet mention. Vorta awoke with a shudder that sent a great deal of loose rock and dust falling noisily down to the cavern floor. His body quivered spastically as he stretched muscles that had not been used in a long time, not since the battle. A sharp pain went through his right leg, calling immediate attention to the fact that it was still pinned down by a large rock. Reaching around with a difficult, painful movement, Vorta grasped the rock. It was not much larger than his head, and normally would not have required much exertion to move, but it took great effort just to lift it high enough to remove his leg. With an echoed thump, the rock fell to the cavern floor as Vorta examined his leg. Badly damaged, it was slightly twisted above the knee. He surmised it was broken during the battle, healing at an odd angle as time passed. As bad as it looked, it was only stiff and sore. Although he could move it with difficulty, he knew he would never regain its full use. Lifting his body, he experimentally flexed and moved his muscles, taking inventory of old wounds and how they healed. Despite the aches of disused muscles and joints, he quickly determined that the crippled leg was his only lasting damage. Looking around, he saw bright pinpoints of light in the night sky. The cavern's ceiling partially caved in during the fight, creating a large opening through which he could leave, and which was probably the source of the rock that had broken his leg. By the faint starlight, he saw the dim shapes of rubble from the falling ceiling. Considering the amount and size of the rock, he felt fortunate to escape with only an injured leg. Even in the darkness, Vorta knew the tunnel that led from the cavern to the outside was partially blocked, so it would no longer serve him as an exit. The warrior who stumbled upon his hiding place through luck had been very thorough in his attempt to keep Vorta trapped within the cavern. Luckily, that attempt fell short. The battle was still fresh in his mind. The warrior had magical armor and an equally magic sword. That armor helped the warrior only for a little while, but the sword, with its magical blasts of power, made the battle far more dangerous. One of those bolts collapsed the cavern roof on top of both of them. The opening appeared to be Vorta's only way out, as his bulk would never fit through the partially collapsed tunnel. Vorta walked about the cavern, stepping over chunks of gold and myriad treasures strewn about. He had collected them for centuries, and many were rare artifacts no human had ever seen. The fact that his hoard was still intact brought a slight smile to his lips. Apparently, the unanticipated battle with the warrior went entirely in his favor. He could not imagine that, if the warrior survived, the treasure amassed there would still be lying about collecting dust, nor would his head still be attached to his very alive body. Still, he did not know how much time had elapsed since the battle, nor did he wish to be caught unaware again. Had he not been in deep sleep when the warrior found him, that human would never have made it past the tunnel's entrance. Looking skyward again, Vorta made his decision. Outstretching his huge scaled wings, the ancient red dragon lifted himself from the rock floor and flew into the night sky. His belly growled with the hunger from his long sleep, while his heart echoed the sentiment with anger at having been attacked. Even if there were no oncoming armies to fight, he decided it was well past time to satisfy both hungers. So it was that death came on wing from the great red mountains in the east to Norval, from what was now known as the peak of Toran. Vorta's shadow left behind death, destruction, and ash. Even so, he sealed his fate when he took his first victims.